My rich wife threw me out of a moving vehicle after believing her daughter's lies 3 weeks later. She asked if I'd reflected instead. I handed her divorce papers. Her daughter lost it. My name is Adrian Cross, and let me tell you something right off the bat. I used to be the kind of guy who believed in happily ever after. Yeah, I know, laugh it up. Here I was, 38 years old, thinking I'd figured out the secret sauce to marriage. Turns out, the only thing I'd figured out was how to be a grade A sucker. For 6 years, I thought Miranda and I had something real. Something that could weather any storm, survive any crisis, outlast any of those reality TV marriages that crash and burn faster than a NASCAR wreck. We weren't those people, I told myself. We were different. We were solid. Well, we were completely screwed, but I didn't know that yet. Picture this. It's a Tuesday evening in October, and I'm sitting in the back of Miranda's ridiculous luxury SUV. A gleaming black Escalade that cost more than most people's annual salary. The leather seats smell like money and Miranda's expensive perfume. That Chanel stuff she orders from Paris because apparently, the American version isn't good enough for her delicate sensibilities. The whole vehicle screams, "Look at me, I'm important," which should have been my first red flag. But hey, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently dumber than a box of rocks. We're coming back from dinner at some pretentious restaurant downtown, where they serve portions so small you need a magnifying glass to find them on your plate, and the waiter talks about the chef's vision, like he's the next Picasso instead of some guy who charges $40 for 3 shrimp and a garnish. But Miranda loves that scene, loves being seen in those places, loves the way other diners recognize her and whisper about her success. And me? I just went along with it because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You support their dreams, even when those dreams involve paying restaurant prices that could fund a small country's defense budget. That's when her daughter decided to drop her little bomb. Lila, sweet, innocent, 20-year-old Lila, who had about as much sweetness in her as a rattlesnake with a hangover. This kid had been gunning for me since day one, treating me like I was some kind of home invader who'd wandered into their perfect little mother-daughter paradise and refused to leave. Never mind that Miranda and I met 2 years after her divorce. Never mind that I'd bent over backward trying to build a relationship with this spoiled princess. Never mind that I'd paid for half her college tuition without so much as a thank you card. In Lila's world, I was the villain, and she was just waiting for the perfect moment to write me out of the story. So there we are, cruising through the city in our mobile status symbol, when Little Miss Sunshine leans forward from her seat. I can still smell her perfume. Some trendy garbage that probably cost more per ounce than gold, mixed with the lingering scent of whatever overpriced cocktail she'd been nursing at dinner. Her voice, when it came, had that particular tone that every man learns to fear. Sweet on the surface, poison underneath. "Mom," she said, and I swear I could hear the smile in her voice. "We need to talk about Adrian." Miranda glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I should have seen something in her eyes right then. Some flicker of doubt. Some crack in the foundation I thought we'd built together. But I was too busy being annoyed with Lila's dramatics to notice that my wife was already halfway to believing whatever garbage was about to spill out of her daughter's mouth. "He's been stealing from you," Lila continued, each word dropping like acid on my marriage. "I've been watching, and I know what I've seen. He's only here for your money, Mom. He doesn't love you. He loves your bank account." Now, let me pause here for a second to appreciate the sheer audacity of this accusation. Me? Stealing from Miranda? I was the guy who insisted on separate checking accounts because I didn't want anyone thinking I was some kind of gold digger. I was the guy who paid for groceries with my own credit card, who bought my own clothes, who drove my own beat-up Honda because I refused to let anyone say I was living off my wife's success. I was so paranoid about appearances that I probably bent over backward more than a circus contortionist trying to prove I wasn't after her money. But here's the thing about lies. They don't have to be true to be effective. They just have to land at exactly the right moment, hit exactly the right insecurity, push exactly the right button. And Lila, evil little mastermind that she was, had found Miranda's button and pressed it like she was calling for an elevator. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to point out the obvious flaws in this ridiculous accusation, to remind Miranda of all the times I'd proven my loyalty, my love, my complete lack of interest in her finances beyond wanting her to be happy and secure. But Miranda's voice cut through the air like a blade. Stop the car. Those 3 words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not, Adrian. What do you have to say about this? Not, Lila. That's a serious accusation. Just stop the car. Like I was suddenly toxic waste that needed to be disposed of immediately. Our driver, some poor guy named James who probably saw more family drama than a soap opera scriptwriter, dutifully pulled over to the curb. We were on Riverside Drive. I remember that detail with crystal clarity, because sometimes trauma burns the stupidest details into your brain. There was a streetlight casting everything in that sickly orange glow, and I could see a homeless guy pushing a shopping cart on the sidewalk, probably wondering what kind of reality show nonsense was about to unfold in front of him. Miranda, I said, and I hated how my voice sounded. Desperate, confused, like a man who just realized he'd been playing a game where nobody bothered to tell him the rules had changed. You can't seriously believe. Get out. 2 more words. That's all it took to end 6 years of marriage, 6 years of what I thought was love, 6 years of building a life together. 2 words from the woman who used to tell me I was her anchor, her safe harbor, her better half. 2 words that turned me from husband into stranger in the space of a heartbeat. I tried one more time, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Miranda, please, just listen to me for 1 second. That's when she snapped. Maybe it was the stress of the accusation, maybe it was some deep-seated doubt that had been festering for months, or maybe she was just tired of pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. Whatever the reason, my calm, collected, always in control wife completely lost her mind. The door swung open, and before I could process what was happening, Miranda's perfectly manicured hand connected with my chest in a shove that would have made a linebacker proud. Now, I'm not a small guy, 6'2", about 190 pounds, reasonably athletic for a man pushing 40. But physics is physics, and when you're not expecting to get launched out of a moving vehicle by your wife, even a slow-moving vehicle doesn't give you much chance to stick the landing. I tumbled out of that Escalade like a sack of potatoes, my body hitting the asphalt with all the grace of a meteor impact. The world spun, gravel bit into my palms, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the door slam shut, heard the engine rev, heard the sound of my marriage driving away at about 40 miles per hour. I lay there on the side of Riverside Drive, watching those taillights disappear into the night, and I swear I could see Lila's silhouette in the back window, probably smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, I suppose she had. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Me out of the picture, her mom all to herself, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd destroyed a man's life with nothing more than a few well-placed lies. The homeless guy with the shopping cart stopped and asked if I was okay. A stranger showed more concern for my well-being in that moment than my wife of 6 years had. Funny how the universe works sometimes, isn't it? You know what's funny about getting thrown out of a moving car by your wife? The first thing that goes through your mind isn't, oh my God, I could have died, or even, I can't believe she just did that. Nope. The first thing I thought, lying there on the cold asphalt with gravel embedded in my palms like some kind of twisted acupuncture, was, I really hope nobody got this on video. Because that's where we are as a society, folks. Even in our most humiliating moments, we're worried about going viral for all the wrong reasons. The homeless guy, let's call him Charlie, because he looked like a Charlie, helped me sit up and asked if I needed him to call someone. I almost laughed. Call who? My wife, who just used me as human garbage disposal. My stepdaughter, who was probably already posting about this on Instagram with some caption like, trash takes itself out #blessed. My mother, who lived 3 states away and had never liked Miranda anyway. Yeah, that conversation would go well. Hey Mom, remember how you said Miranda seemed cold? Well, turns out you were right, and also she just tried to turn me into roadkill. Charlie stuck around while I took inventory of my injuries. Scraped hands, bruised ribs, what felt like road rash on my left elbow, and an ego that had been run over by a metaphorical 18-wheeler. Nothing that would kill me, but enough to make sitting on concrete feel like a 5-star spa treatment compared to standing up. You want me to call the cops? Charlie asked, pulling out a phone that looked like it had survived the apocalypse. That looked like assault to me. Assault. The word hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? My wife of 6 years had physically shoved me out of a moving vehicle. If some random dude had done that to me, I'd have pressed charges faster than you could say lawsuit. But this was Miranda, the woman who used to make me coffee in the morning and kiss my forehead when I had a headache. The woman who cried during Hallmark commercials and insisted we adopt a rescue dog because everyone deserves a second chance. Apparently, everyone except her husband. Nah, I told Charlie, though every rational brain cell I had left was screaming at me to document this mess. Not yet. Not yet. Like I was saving up my revenge for a special occasion. 2 more people stopped before the ambulance arrived. A middle-aged woman named Janet who worked as a nurse and insisted on checking my pupils for signs of concussion, and some college kid who kept asking if I wanted him to post about this on TikTok to raise awareness about domestic violence. I appreciated the sentiment, but the last thing I needed was to become a cautionary tale set to trending audio clips. The ambulance showed up about 20 minutes later, which in city time might as well have been the speed of light. The paramedic who hopped out was this stern-looking Latino guy, probably in his 50s, with the kind of mustache that meant business. His name tag read Diego, and he had the air of someone who'd seen every possible way humans could screw up their lives. "What happened here?" Diego asked, kneeling down to examine my scraped hands with the efficiency of someone who'd bandaged up half the city. "My wife threw me out of her car," I said, because what was the point of sugarcoating it? Literally. Diego raised an eyebrow that could have launched 1,000 memes. "She threw you out of a moving car?" "Well, it wasn't exactly moving fast," I said, like that somehow made it better. "Maybe 10, 15 miles per hour? More of an aggressive ejection than attempted murder." "Uh-huh." Diego started cleaning the gravel out of my palms with the gentle touch of someone who'd perfected the art of causing the least amount of additional pain. "And why did she do that?" "Her daughter told her I was stealing from her." "Were you?" "No." "Did you tell your wife that?" "I tried. She wasn't in a listening mood." Diego nodded like this was just another Tuesday for him. "You want to file charges?" There it was again. That question. The one that would turn this from a really bad marriage fight into an actual legal situation. The one that would make this real in a way that going home and sleeping it off couldn't fix. I shook my head. "Not yet." "All right," Diego said, applying some kind of antiseptic that stung like hell. "But you should get checked out at the hospital. Could have internal injuries, and head trauma doesn't always show symptoms right away." "I'm fine," I insisted, which was probably the biggest lie I'd told all day, and considering my wife had just accused me of being a thief, that was saying something. "No, you're not," Diego said matter-of-factly. "Nobody's fine after getting tossed out of a car by someone they trusted. But you're not bleeding internally, so that's a start." He finished bandaging my hands and handed me a card. "That's my supervisor's number. You change your mind about filing charges, you call that. Sometimes people need time to process before they're ready to do what needs doing." The ride to the hospital was a blur of forms and questions and nurses who looked at me with that particular combination of sympathy and judgment reserved for men who end up in emergency rooms because of domestic disputes. They x-rayed everything, poked and prodded me like a science experiment, and eventually declared me bruised but not broken. Physically, anyway. It was almost midnight when I finally made it to the Sunset Motor Lodge, a place that generously described itself as affordable accommodations, but was basically where hope went to die. The room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, with a carpet that had seen things no carpet should see and wallpaper that looked like it was held up by pure stubbornness. I sat on the edge of the bed, which creaked like it was personally offended by my weight, and finally checked my phone. 17 missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. 43 text messages. 67 notifications from social media. My heart jumped for about half a second, thinking maybe Miranda had come to her senses and was trying to apologize. Maybe she'd realized that her daughter was a manipulative little snake and wanted to make things right. Maybe we could still save this train wreck of a marriage. But no, not a single message from Miranda. Instead, I got to scroll through a parade of messages from mutual friends, acquaintances, and random people who'd apparently heard about my sidewalk faceplant through the miracle of modern gossip networks. And the cherry on top of this humiliation Sunday, Miranda had posted about it. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a hey, maybe throwing my husband out of a moving car was a bad idea. Nope. She'd posted a photo of herself looking triumphant with the caption, Sometimes you have to cut the dead weight to move forward. Feeling blessed and free. Hashtag new chapter, hashtag know your worth, hashtag bye. Feeling blessed and free. That's what 6 years of marriage boiled down to in her mind. Dead weight that she'd finally had the courage to dump on the side of the road. The comments were even better. Her friends and followers cheering her on like she'd just won a marathon instead of committed vehicular assault. You're so brave. He never deserved you. I always knew something was off about him. I turned the phone face down and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked remarkably like the outline of my shattered dignity. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out what came next. Tonight, I just had to survive the humiliation of being turned into social media entertainment by the woman who used to promise me forever. The worst part? A tiny voice in the back of my head was wondering if maybe they were all right. Maybe I really was just dead weight. Maybe Miranda really was better off without me. But that voice got smaller as the anger got bigger. Because even if I was dead weight, even if I was the worst husband in the history of marriage, nobody deserved to be thrown out of a car like garbage. Nobody. You know what nobody tells you about being suddenly homeless in your late 30s? Everything you own starts to feel incredibly stupid. Like, why did I need 17 different types of coffee mugs? Why did I keep that broken blender for 3 years, just in case I figured out how to fix it? And why, for the love of all that's holy, did I own so many novelty t-shirts that I never wore, but couldn't bring myself to throw away? These were the deep philosophical questions occupying my brain as I stood in Marcus Lee's spare bedroom, surrounded by the pathetic collection of belongings I'd managed to salvage from my former life. Marcus, bless his army-trained soul, had taken one look at me showing up on his doorstep at 2 in the morning looking like I'd been hit by a truck, because technically, I had been hit by an Escalade, and just stepped aside to let me in. Beer or whiskey, he'd asked, like those were the only 2 options for dealing with life's catastrophes. Which, honestly, they probably are. We'd served together in Afghanistan about 15 years ago, back when we thought we knew what real problems looked like. Turns out, dodging IEDs was nothing compared to dodging your wife's emotional shrapnel. At least in a war zone, you know who the enemy is supposed to be. Marcus lived in one of those converted warehouse apartments that screamed, bachelor with commitment issues. Exposed brick walls, minimal furniture that looked like it came from the clearance section of whatever store sold industrial chic to guys who watched too much HGTV. The spare room was basically a glorified closet with a futon that had seen better decades, but it beat the hell out of the Sunset Motor Lodge and its ode to desperation. So, Marcus said on my first morning there, handing me a cup of coffee that could have stripped paint, "You gonna tell me what happened? Or do I have to guess? Because right now I'm thinking either you robbed a bank or your wife finally snapped." "Door number 2, I said, and proceeded to give him the whole sordid tale. Marcus had met Miranda exactly twice, once at our wedding and once at a barbecue where she'd spent the entire time complaining about the smoke getting on her designer dress. He'd never been a fan, but he'd been too polite to say anything. Well, too polite and too smart, because criticizing a man's wife is a good way to lose a friend, even when you're right. "Jesus Christ, Adrian," he said when I finished. "She threw you out of a moving car?" And posted about it online. The posting might actually be worse than the throwing, I admitted. At least when she threw me, it was in the heat of the moment. The posting was premeditated humiliation. Marcus shook his head like he was trying to clear water out of his ears. "And you're not pressing charges because I'm an idiot?" "Well, yeah, but specifically what kind of idiot?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What kind of idiot was I? The kind who still loved the woman who'd literally thrown him away? The kind who thought maybe, somehow, this could all be fixed? The kind who was too proud to admit his marriage had been a complete disaster from day one? All of the above, probably. The days started blending together after that. I'd wake up on Marcus's futon feeling like I'd been run over by the same Escalade all over again, drink his industrial-strength coffee, and then spend the day pretending to job hunt while actually refreshing social media like some kind of digital masochist. Miranda's online victory tour was in full swing. Every day brought new posts about her journey of self-discovery and learning to value herself. Photos of her at yoga class, at brunch with friends, at some spa getting treatments that probably cost more than most people's rent. All accompanied by captions that made her sound like she'd just escaped from prison instead of throwing her husband out of a car. The worst part was watching our mutual friends choose sides. And guess what? Team Miranda was winning by a landslide. Apparently, I'd been upgraded from husband to that guy Miranda had to get rid of in the court of public opinion. People who'd eaten dinner at our house, who'd laughed at my jokes, who'd acted like they genuinely cared about me. Suddenly they were treating me like I had some kind of contagious disease. Sarah from Miranda's book club unfriended me on Facebook. Tom from our couple's dinner group blocked me on Instagram. Even my dentist's office called to reschedule my appointment, and I'd bet good money Miranda had something to do with that too. Meanwhile, Lila was having the time of her life. Her social media had transformed into some kind of victory parade, with posts about toxic people and protecting family and other inspirational garbage that probably came straight from whatever self-help book she was reading this week. She'd even changed her profile picture to one of her and Miranda hugging, with a caption that read, "My queen crown #Mother knows best #Real recognize real." Real recognize real. Coming from a 20-year-old who'd never held a job longer than 6 months, and whose biggest accomplishment was convincing her mother to pay for her spring break trip to Cancun. That was rich. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Eventually, you either dig deeper or you start climbing. And somewhere around day 10 of my exile, staring at yet another social media post about Miranda's glow up, something shifted inside me. I was sitting in Marcus's living room, laptop balanced on my knees, when I came across a post that made my blood pressure spike to stroke levels. It was a picture of Miranda and Lila at some fancy restaurant, raising champagne glasses in a toast. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings and the courage to leave the past behind. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Wastebasket sparkles. #blessed. #motherdaughter. #new chapter." The trash takes itself out. That's what I was to them. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of supporting Miranda's dreams, 6 years of trying to build a relationship with her poisonous daughter, and I was trash that had taken itself out. "You okay over there?" Marcus asked, looking up from whatever military documentary he was watching. "You look like you're about to have an aneurysm." "Just peachy," I said, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. Living the dream. Marcus muted the TV and turned to face me. "All right, real talk time. How long are you going to do this to yourself?" "Do what?" "This." He gestured at me like I was a particularly disappointing science experiment. "Wallowing. Refreshing her social media every 5 minutes. Acting like a kicked dog hoping she'll let you back in the house." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. And it's pathetic." Marcus had never been one to sugarcoat things. "You want to know what I think?" "Not really, but you're going to tell me anyway." "Damn right I am. I think you're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself because it's easier than admitting you're pissed off. And you should be pissed off, Adrian. That woman didn't just break up with you. She humiliated you. She turned you into entertainment for her social media followers. She threw you out of a car like you were a McDonald's wrapper." He was right, of course. I was pissed off. Furious, actually. But fury felt dangerous, like if I let myself really feel it, I might do something stupid. Something that would prove Miranda and Lila right about me being the villain in their story. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Key her car? Post revenge porn? Become one of those guys who shows up at their ex's workplace with a boombox? How about you stop acting like a victim and start acting like a man who got screwed over?" Marcus said. "How about you fight back?" Fight back. 2 words that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. 2 words that would transform me from roadkill into predator. But that night, lying on the futon and staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was how easily 6 years of my life had been erased. How quickly love could turn into contempt. How efficiently I'd been edited out of the story Miranda was telling about her life. Well, if she wanted to rewrite history, 2 could play that game. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Whoever came up with that phrase obviously never had their life blown up by a 20-year-old sociopath and her enabling mother. Because let me tell you, when you're sitting in your buddy's spare room surrounded by bankers' boxes full of paperwork, revenge doesn't feel cold at all. It feels like the slow burn of a really good bourbon going down, warm, steady, and guaranteed to mess you up if you're not careful. Marcus's words had been bouncing around in my head for 3 days. Stop acting like a victim and start acting like a man who got screwed over. Simple advice, really. The kind of thing that sounds obvious when someone else says it, but feels revolutionary when it finally clicks in your own brain. So I did what any rational man would do when his life gets turned upside down by false accusations. I dug out every single document I'd carefully filed away over the past 6 years. Bank statements, business contracts, property deeds, investment records, insurance policies, receipts for major purchases, even those stupid warranty cards I'd filled out religiously because you never know when you might need them. Turns out, you need them when your wife tries to rewrite history and pretend you were nothing but a leech sucking her dry. The dining table in Marcus's apartment looked like a forensic accountant had exploded all over it. Piles of papers sorted by year, by category, by relevance to the case I was building in my head. Marcus took one look at the organizational chaos and whistled low. Damn, dude. You keep better records than the IRS. Military training, I said, though honestly, it was more like paranoid training. Growing up with a father who'd been screwed over in his own divorce had taught me to document everything. Paper trail tells the real story. And what a story it was telling. See, here's what Miranda and her precious daughter had conveniently forgotten when they decided to paint me as some kind of fortune hunter. I wasn't just some random guy who'd wandered into their lives with empty pockets and big dreams. When Miranda and I met, I was already doing pretty well for myself. Not rich by her standards, but comfortable. I had my own house, my own car, my own savings account, and a consulting business that was actually turning a decent profit. But love makes you do stupid things. Like selling your house to help your new wife buy her dream home. Like investing your savings into her boutique business when the initial investor backed out. Like co-signing loans and putting your credit on the line because we're partners now and partners support each other. The evidence was all there, spread across Marcus's table like a very expensive jigsaw puzzle. Bank transfer records showing my money flowing into Miranda's accounts. Business documents with both our signatures, establishing me as a partner in her precious boutique, not just some employee she could fire at will. Investment statements showing joint accounts where my contributions were clearly documented. My favorite discovery was a folder labeled Property Records that contained the deed to our house. Excuse me, Miranda's house, according to her social media narrative. Funny thing about that deed, it had both our names on it. Equal ownership, established when we bought the place together using the proceeds from selling my house, plus a chunk of Miranda's inheritance from her grandmother. But the real gold mine was the business records. Miranda's boutique. Yes, she'd actually named it that, because creativity was never her strong suit, had been hemorrhaging money when I'd stepped in. The initial business plan was about as realistic as a unicorn farm, and the first year's financials looked like someone had been using the cash register as their personal piggy bank. That's when I'd suggested we restructure everything. Bring in a real accountant, establish proper inventory controls, create an actual marketing strategy instead of just hoping people would stumble across her store and fall in love with overpriced scarves. I'd even rolled up my sleeves and handled the marketing myself, designing the website, setting up social media accounts, negotiating with suppliers. The turnaround had been pretty impressive, actually. Within 18 months, we'd gone from losing money every quarter to showing a healthy profit. The business had tripled its customer base, expanded to online sales, and even opened a second location. Miranda had gone from stressed-out boutique owner on the verge of bankruptcy to successful entrepreneur with a growing empire. But according to the story she was telling now, she'd done it all herself. I was just some deadweight husband who'd been along for the ride, contributing nothing but taking everything. The paperwork said otherwise. Every major business decision had required both our signatures. Every loan application listed both our incomes. Every tax return showed joint filing with shared business income. Hell, I was technically listed as co-owner and chief marketing officer on the official business registration. This is some serious ammunition, Marcus said, studying a particularly damaging contract that clearly showed my financial investment in the business. What are you going to do with it? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Because having evidence is one thing. Knowing what to do with it is something else entirely. I could march into Miranda's boutique and wave these papers around like some kind of wronged businessman demanding justice. I could post my own social media takedown, complete with photographic evidence of every financial contribution I'd made to our life together. I could even show up at one of her yoga classes and make a scene that would give her followers something really interesting to talk about. But all of those options felt small, reactive. like I'd be playing her game instead of starting my own. That's when I remembered Eleanor Voss. Eleanor and I had worked together about 5 years ago when her previous law firm needed some marketing consultation. She was the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers nervous, brilliant, ruthless, and completely immune to the sob stories that made most people fold like cheap lawn chairs. She'd left her old firm to start her own practice, specializing in high-stakes divorce cases and business disputes. Her reputation was legendary. If you wanted someone destroyed legally and financially, Eleanor was your girl. More importantly, she'd never liked Miranda. During the few times they'd met at business functions, Eleanor had made it clear she thought my wife was what she called professionally charming, which was lawyer speak for fake as a $3 bill. I found Eleanor's number in my contacts and stared at it for about 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the call button. Because calling Eleanor meant this was real. It meant I was done hoping Miranda would come to her senses and apologize. It meant I was ready to burn down everything we'd built together if that's what it took to get justice. The phone rang 3 times before Eleanor's voice cut through with its usual efficiency. Adrian Cross. I was wondering when you'd call. You heard about what happened? Honey, everyone's heard about what happened. Your wife turned you into a social media meme. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I looked around Marcus's apartment, at the futon that had been my bed for 3 weeks, at the boxes of belongings that represented the wreckage of my former life, at the evidence spread across the table that proved everything Lila had said was a lie. I want to take back what's mine, I said. Eleanor's laugh was sharp and satisfied. Good. Let's set up a meeting. Bring everything you've got, and we'll see just how much your dear wife is going to regret throwing you out of that car. How much is this going to cost me? Don't worry about my fee, Eleanor said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Something tells me this case is going to pay for itself. Besides, I've been waiting for an excuse to take down someone like Miranda for years. Consider this a professional pleasure. I hung up and looked at Marcus, who'd been listening to the entire conversation with growing amusement. Feel better? He asked. Not yet, I said, starting to gather up the papers. But I'm about to. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you one hell of an advantage when you finally decide to show people what you're really capable of. Miranda and Lila thought they'd gotten rid of dead weight. They were about to learn they'd actually just poked a sleeping bear. You know that moment in horror movies when the monster that everyone thought was dead suddenly opens its eyes? That's exactly what I felt like when Marcus shook me awake at 9 in the morning with the kind of grin that meant trouble was about to walk through our front door. Guess who's here to see you? He said, and I could hear voices in the living room. One familiar, one unfortunately more familiar. I'd been expecting this visit for exactly 3 weeks and 1 day. Not because I'm psychic, but because I know Miranda better than she knows herself. She operates on a very predictable cycle: impulse, justification, doubt, panic, damage control. 3 weeks was about how long it took for her to work through the first 4 stages and realize that maybe, just maybe, throwing your husband out of a moving car might have legal consequences. I pulled on yesterday's jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better decades, ran my fingers through my hair to achieve that I definitely haven't been plotting your downfall look, and walked into the living room like I was heading to my own execution. There she was, standing in Marcus's bachelor pad like a queen surveying a peasant village she was considering having burned down. Miranda looked exactly like she always did when she was trying to intimidate someone into submission. Perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than most people's car payments, makeup applied with the precision of a Renaissance painter, and an outfit that screamed, I have more money than you, and I'm not afraid to use it. She was wearing this cream-colored blazer over dark jeans and boots that probably cost more than my current monthly budget, accessorized with enough jewelry to fund a small country's infrastructure program. The whole ensemble was designed to remind me of everything I'd supposedly lost when she'd kicked me to the curb. And standing slightly behind her, like a loyal attacked dog waiting for the command to strike, was darling little Lila. Sweet, innocent Lila, who dressed for the occasion in what I could only describe as young professional sociopath chic. A black dress that probably came from her mother's boutique, paired with an expression that suggested she was already planning my funeral. Adrian, Miranda said, and her voice had that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable while being completely unreasonable. I think it's time we talked. Marcus, bless his tactical soul, had positioned himself near the kitchen counter where he could watch the whole show while pretending to make coffee. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow that clearly said, "You want me to throw them out, or are you handling this yourself?" I gave him the tiniest shake of my head. I'd been waiting for this moment for 3 weeks. No way was I missing the show. "Sure," I said, settling into the chair across from the couch where Miranda had made herself comfortable. "Let's talk. What's on your mind?" Miranda smoothed her hands over her jeans like she was preparing for a business presentation. "I think you've had enough time to reflect on what happened, to think about your behavior, and maybe come to some realizations about why things went so wrong between us." Reflect on my behavior. That was rich. I'd spent 3 weeks reflecting. All right. Reflecting on 6 years of marriage to a woman who'd apparently been keeping a mental scoreboard of every perceived slight and disappointment, just waiting for an excuse to cash them all in at once. "I've definitely been doing some reflecting," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as Switzerland. "What kind of realizations were you hoping I'd come to?" "Well," Miranda said, glancing at Lila for support, "I think you need to acknowledge that you crossed some lines. That maybe you took advantage of my generosity and lost sight of what was appropriate in our relationship. Lost sight of what was appropriate. Coming from the woman who'd physically assaulted me and then bragged about it online, that was absolutely hilarious. And what lines would those be exactly?" I asked. Lila leaned forward like she'd been waiting for her cue to join the conversation. "The financial ones, obviously. The way you used Mom's success for your own benefit without contributing anything real in return. I had to give her credit. She delivered that line with the confidence of someone who actually believed it. Either she was a better actress than I'd given her credit for, or she'd actually convinced herself that her lie was the truth. Both options were equally terrifying." "Interesting theory," I said. "Anything else?" Miranda took a deep breath like she was about to deliver a particularly difficult diagnosis. "Look, Adrian, I know this has been hard on you. Being asked to leave was abrupt. But I think if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that things hadn't been working between us for a while." Things hadn't been working. That was one way to describe discovering that your wife's daughter had been systematically poisoning her against you while you were busy trying to build a family. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "I think," Miranda said, her voice taking on that sweet, reasonable tone that had once made me fall in love with her and now made my skin crawl, "that if you're willing to apologize for your behavior and acknowledge the mistakes you made, we might be able to work something out. Maybe you could come home, and we could try to rebuild our relationship on a more honest foundation." Come home. Like she was offering me some kind of generous gift instead of proposing that I crawl back to the scene of my humiliation and pretend nothing had happened. "And what would this honest foundation look like?" I asked. Lila jumped in before Miranda could answer. "It would mean respecting boundaries, not taking advantage of Mom's kindness. Maybe getting your own place eventually, instead of just assuming you're entitled to live in our house. Our house, not the house Miranda and I had bought together with my money. Our house, like I'd been nothing more than a long-term house guest who'd overstayed his welcome." I looked at Miranda to see if she was going to correct her daughter's little power play, but she just sat there nodding like Lila had said something profound instead of something completely insane. That's when I realized that this wasn't really an apology mission at all. This was a negotiation from a position of assumed strength. They weren't here because they missed me or because they'd realized they'd made a mistake. They were here because somewhere in the back of Miranda's mind, a little voice was whispering that maybe she'd gone too far. Maybe throwing her husband out of a car and broadcasting it to the world hadn't been her smartest move. But instead of admitting that, instead of acknowledging that she'd screwed up, she was trying to reframe the whole situation as me needing to earn my way back into her good graces. It was actually kind of beautiful, in a completely psychotic way. "Well," I said, standing up and walking over to the kitchen counter where I'd left my coffee, "that's certainly an interesting offer. So you'll consider it?" Miranda asked, and for just a second, I caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes. Like maybe she wasn't as confident about her position as she was pretending to be. I took a long sip of coffee, savoring the moment. Because this was it. The moment I'd been planning for 3 weeks. The moment when I stopped being the victim and started being the guy who fights back. I reached into the manila envelope I'd left on the counter and pulled out a neat stack of papers, bound with one of those little black clips that lawyers love so much. Actually, I said, walking back over and holding out the envelope to Miranda. I've got a counteroffer for you. She took the envelope with the kind of careful motion people use when they're not sure if they're being handed a gift or a bomb. What is this? She asked. Divorce papers, I said, and the words felt like freedom sliding off my tongue. I did reflect, Miranda. I reflected on 6 years of marriage to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story. I reflected on being married to someone who thought physical violence was an appropriate response to a family disagreement. And you know what conclusion I came to? Miranda's face had gone very pale, and she was staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust. I'm done, I said. I'm done being your convenient scapegoat. I'm done pretending your daughter's toxicity is something I need to tolerate. And I'm definitely done being married to someone who thinks sorry means demanding that I apologize to her. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it for dinner. Chapter 6, The Daughter's Explosion. You know that moment in a movie when the villain finally realizes the hero isn't going to roll over and die? That split second when their smug confidence cracks, and you can see the panic creeping in around the edges? That's exactly what was happening on Miranda's face as she stared at those divorce papers like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. But before she could even process what she was holding, her darling daughter decided to remind everyone why she was the real mastermind behind this whole disaster. What the hell is this supposed to be? Lila shrieked, and I mean shrieked. The sound that came out of her mouth was somewhere between a fire alarm and a dying cat, pitched at exactly the frequency designed to shatter both glass and eardrums. She'd been lurking in the hallway, because of course she had, probably listening to every word and getting more pissed off by the second that her carefully orchestrated reunion wasn't going according to plan. Now she came storming into the living room like a tiny tornado of designer clothes and misplaced rage. You can't do this, she continued, her voice climbing to levels that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. You're nothing without her. You're absolutely nothing. I had to admire the commitment to her narrative, really. Even faced with legal documents that were about to turn her world upside down, Lila was still pushing the same tired script. Poor, helpless Adrian, who'd been living off mommy's generosity and now had the audacity to bite the hand that fed him. Marcus, who'd been watching this whole drama unfold with the fascination of someone observing a particularly violent nature documentary, actually started grinning. He'd never seen Lila lose her composure before. Hell, none of us had. The girl was usually ice-cold calculating, all fake smiles and strategic tears. But apparently, divorce papers were her kryptonite. Lila, calm down, Miranda said, though she looked about as calm as someone defusing a bomb while riding a roller coaster. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking as she flipped through the papers, and I could see her brain working overtime trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to her master plan. No. Lila spun around to face her mother, and for the first time since I'd known her, the mask completely slipped. Gone was the sweet, innocent victim act. Gone was the concerned daughter just trying to protect her mom. What stood in my living room? Well, Marcus's living room was pure, undiluted entitlement wearing a designer dress. This is exactly what I warned you about, she continued, jabbing her finger at me like I was some kind of exotic disease. He's trying to take everything. He's trying to destroy our family. Our family. There it was again, that possessive little phrase that had been driving me crazy for 6 years. Not the family, or my mom's family, or even my family. Our family, like she and Miranda were some kind of exclusive club that I'd never really been invited to join. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair and enjoying the show, I'm not trying to take everything. I'm just taking what's legally mine. There's a difference. You have no right to anything. Lila screamed, and now she was really getting warmed up. Her face was turning red, her carefully styled hair was coming undone, and she was gesticulating wildly like she was conducting an orchestra of chaos. You married her for her money, and now you're trying to steal it in divorce court. That's when something truly beautiful happened. Miranda, who had been sitting there in stunned silence while her daughter threw her tantrum, suddenly looked up from the papers with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or confusion or even fear. It was realization. Lila, she said quietly, stop. But Lila was on a roll now. too deep in her rage to notice that she was digging her own grave with every word. He never loved you, Mom. He was just waiting for the right moment to cash in. And now he's found some sleazy lawyer to help him steal everything we've worked for. I couldn't help myself. What exactly did you work for, Lila? Your biggest achievement in the last year was getting your mother to pay for your spring break trip to Cabo. I protected her from you. Lila shot back, and there it was, the truth, naked and ugly and absolutely damning. I saw through your act from day one. I knew what you really were. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Because what Lila had just admitted, in her uncontrolled fury, was that she'd been plotting against me from the very beginning. Not protecting her mother from some recent betrayal, not responding to suspicious behavior she'd suddenly noticed. She'd been actively working to destroy my marriage from day one. Miranda was staring at her daughter like she'd never seen her before. And maybe she hadn't, really. Maybe she'd been so blinded by maternal love and the desire to keep her daughter happy that she'd never noticed what a manipulative little sociopath she'd raised. You planned this, Miranda said slowly, and her voice was so quiet it was barely audible. From the beginning. You never gave him a chance. Of course I never gave him a chance. Lila exploded, too far gone to realize she was confessing to years of psychological warfare. Why would I? He was just some random guy who thought he could waltz into our lives and take over. You were fine before he showed up. We were fine. And there it was, the real motive, laid bare in all its twisted glory. This wasn't about protecting her mother or preventing financial abuse or any of the noble reasons she'd been selling. This was about a spoiled 20-year-old who couldn't handle sharing mommy's attention and had spent 6 years systematically destroying any chance of happiness her mother might have found. Marcus was openly staring now, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. I think even he was impressed by the sheer scope of Lila's manipulation and the spectacular way it was all falling apart. Lila, Miranda said, and now her voice was getting stronger, more certain. You lied to me. About the money, about Adrian stealing, about everything. I didn't lie, Lila insisted, but her voice was getting shrill and desperate. I was protecting you. You're too trusting, too naive. You needed someone to look out for your interests. By destroying my marriage. It wasn't a real marriage anyway. Lila shot back, and I swear I could see the exact moment when she realized she'd gone too far. Her face went pale, her mouth snapped shut, and she looked around the room like she was suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her with varying degrees of horror and disgust. Miranda stood up slowly, those divorce papers still clutched in her hands. And for the first time in 6 years, she looked at her daughter the way she should have been looking at her all along, like someone who'd just discovered a snake in her bed. Get out, she said quietly. Mom, get out of here, Lila. Right now. Before I say something we'll both regret. You can't be serious, Lila said, but her voice had lost all its fire. Now she just sounded like what she really was. A scared kid who just realized her game was over and she was about to face the consequences. I'm completely serious, Miranda said, and the steel in her voice was something I'd only heard a few times in our marriage, usually when she was dealing with difficult customers or pushy suppliers. You've destroyed enough. Get out. Lila looked around the room one more time, maybe hoping someone would come to her rescue or tell her this was all just a misunderstanding. But Marcus was watching her with open contempt. I was watching her with something that might have been pity if I wasn't still so angry. And her mother was watching her with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than any insult. Fine, Lila said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. But don't come crying to me when he takes everything and leaves you with nothing. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, and then it was just me, Miranda, and the wreckage of 6 years of lies. You know what's better than revenge? Watching your enemies destroy themselves while you sit back and eat popcorn. And boy, did Miranda and Lila put on a show that would have made Shakespeare weep with envy. It started about 3 days after our first court session, when Marcus came home from his morning run with the kind of grin that meant he'd just witnessed something spectacular. He found me in the kitchen, going through more legal documents Eleanor had sent over, evidence for round 2 of our legal smackdown. Dude, he said, still slightly out of breath from his 5-mile route through the neighborhood. You're not gonna believe what I just heard coming from your wife's house. Ex-wife. I corrected automatically, though the papers weren't final yet. Whatever. Point is, they're going at each other like cats in a blender. I could hear them screaming from 2 blocks away. This was interesting news, but not entirely surprising. See, here's the thing about toxic family dynamics. They only work when everyone's united against a common enemy. Remove that enemy, and suddenly all that poison has nowhere to go except inward. Miranda and Lila had spent 6 years bonding over their shared mission to keep me in my place. Now that I was gone and fighting back, they didn't have anything left to bond over except mutual blame. What were they fighting about? I asked, trying to sound casual while internally doing a victory dance. From what I could make out, Lila was yelling something about how this was all Miranda's fault for being weak and stupid, and Miranda was screaming back about Lila ruining her life. Marcus grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and shook his head. It was like listening to a very expensive episode of Jerry Springer. Over the next few days, the reports kept coming in. Because that's the thing about living in a nice neighborhood. Everyone knows everyone else's business, and gossip travels faster than a California wildfire. Janet, our mail carrier, mentioned that she'd had to wait 5 minutes for the shouting to die down before she could safely approach Miranda's front door. The FedEx guy told Marcus he'd actually turned around and left a package at the depot because the screaming coming from inside the house made him think someone was being murdered. Even Mrs. Patterson, the 70-year-old lady who lived next door to Miranda and was usually deaf as a post, started complaining about the noise. But the real intelligence came from Sarah, Miranda's former best friend from book club. I ran into her at the grocery store about a week after the court hearing, and let me tell you, she was practically bursting with information she was dying to share. "Adrian," she said, cornering me in the frozen food aisle like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. "I heard about the divorce. How are you holding up?" Now, Sarah had been Team Miranda since day one of our separation. She'd been one of the people cheerfully commenting on Miranda's social media posts about cutting dead weight and knowing your worth. But apparently, recent developments had caused her to reconsider her loyalties. "I'm doing fine, Sarah," I said, trying to extract myself from the conversation before it turned into a gossip session that would fuel the neighborhood rumor mill for months. "Well, I just want you to know that I never believed those things Lila was saying about you," she said, which was interesting since she'd been publicly supporting Miranda's version of events just 2 weeks ago. "I always thought there was more to the story." "That's very kind of you to say. And honestly," Sarah continued, lowering her voice like we were discussing state secrets, "I think Miranda is finally starting to see what Lila really is. The things that girl has been saying to her mother. It's just awful. This was where I should have politely excused myself and walked away. This was where I should have taken the high road and refused to engage in gossip about my estranged wife and her toxic daughter. This was where I should have been a better person. Instead, I found myself asking, what kind of things?" Sarah's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Well, according to Lisa, who heard it from her daughter who works at the boutique, Lila showed up there last week screaming at Miranda in front of customers. Called her a pathetic old woman who was too stupid to see that you were playing her all along. Wow, even by Lila's standards, that was impressively vicious. But here's the really crazy part," Sarah continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Lila told Miranda that she should be grateful for everything she did to protect her from you. Said Miranda was weak and naive and would have lost everything if Lila hadn't stepped in to save her. I had to give Lila credit for consistency, if not for sanity. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence that she destroyed her mother's marriage for no good reason, she was still doubling down on her savior complex. And what did Miranda say to that? From what Lisa heard, Miranda finally lost it. Started yelling about how Lila had lied to her, how she'd ruined the best relationship she'd ever had, how she'd turned her into the kind of person who throws her husband out of a car. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Apparently, she kicked Lila out of the store and told her not to come back. This was getting better and better. Not only were they fighting, but Miranda was finally starting to understand the scope of what her daughter had done. It was like watching someone wake up from a 6-year coma and realize their entire life had been a lie. But Sarah wasn't done with her intelligence briefing. "And then," she said, leaning in closer, "yesterday, Lila showed up at Miranda's house with some guy she's been dating. You know, that loser with the motorcycle who thinks he's in a boy band? Anyway, she demanded that Miranda give her money for a deposit on an apartment, since Miranda had ruined her living situation by choosing you over her own daughter. Let me guess, I said. Miranda said no. Miranda said hell no. And then Lila started screaming about how Miranda owed her for all the years she'd spent protecting her, how she'd sacrificed her own happiness to keep you from taking advantage of Miranda's kindness. Sarah was clearly relishing every detail. So Miranda told her that the only person who'd been taking advantage of anyone was Lila herself. And then what happened? From what Mrs. Patterson told me, Lila threw something, maybe a vase, and it shattered against the wall. Then she stormed out yelling that Miranda would regret choosing a lying thief over her own flesh and blood. I tried to process this information with appropriate solemnity, but inside I was doing backflips. Because this was exactly what I'd hoped would happen, but better. I'd figured that removing myself from the equation would cause some tension between Miranda and Lila, but I hadn't dared to hope for this level of spectacular implosion. Marcus was right when he got home that evening. I was living rent-free in their heads, and they were tearing each other apart trying to figure out who was to blame for losing me. The best part, Marcus said, settling into his favorite chair with a beer, is that you're not even doing anything. You're just sitting here, going through legal documents and living your life, while they're over there setting their own house on fire. He was right. This wasn't some elaborate revenge scheme I'd orchestrated. This was just the natural consequence of two toxic people being forced to confront the reality of what they'd done without having me around to blame for everything that went wrong in their lives. You think it'll get worse? I asked. Marcus laughed. Brother, this is just the beginning. Wait until the next court hearing when that judge rules in your favor. Wait until Miranda realizes she's about to lose half of everything she thought was hers. Wait until Lila figures out that Mommy isn't going to be able to fund her lifestyle anymore. He was right, of course. This was just the opening act. The real fireworks were still to come. You know that moment in boxing when one fighter lands the perfect punch, not the flashiest or the loudest, but the one that settles everything? That's exactly what the second court hearing felt like, except instead of boxing gloves, we were using legal documents, and instead of a 10 count, we had Judge Chen's gavel. The courtroom looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks earlier, but the energy was completely different. Miranda sat at her table, looking like she'd aged about 5 years since our last appearance. Her perfect composure replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a war on multiple fronts and losing every battle. Her lawyer, Pemberton, looked even worse. The cocky country club confidence had been replaced by the desperate energy of a man who knew he was about to watch his case get dismantled piece by piece. He kept shuffling through his papers like he might magically find some evidence that would save them. But we all knew the truth. They were screwed, and everyone in that courtroom could smell it. Eleanor, on the other hand, looked like a woman who'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She'd traded her usual briefcase for what looked like a small library of documents, all meticulously organized and color-coded. Every piece of evidence we needed to destroy Miranda's claims was right there at her fingertips. But the real difference was the empty chair next to Miranda. Lila was once again nowhere to be seen, which told me everything I needed to know about how their relationship was going. The girl who'd started this whole mess by lying about my supposed theft couldn't even be bothered to show up and watch the consequences of her actions play out. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Chun, the bailiff announced, and we went through the familiar ritual of standing and sitting while Judge Chun settled into her throne of justice. This is the continued hearing in the matter of Cross versus Cross, she said, flipping through what looked like our entire case file. Mr. Pemberton, I trust you've had time to review the evidence presented in our last session? Pemberton stood up like a man walking to his own execution. Yes, Your Honor. The defense maintains that Mrs. Cross's business success was primarily due to her own efforts and vision, and that Mr. Cross's contributions were minimal at best. Judge Chun looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of someone who'd just been told that gravity was optional. Mr. Pemberton, are you suggesting that bank records, business contracts, and sworn testimony are all somehow inaccurate? No, Your Honor, but we believe the context of these contributions has been misrepresented. I see. And what context would that be? This was where Pemberton made his fatal mistake. Instead of cutting his losses and trying to salvage what he could for his client, he decided to double down on stupid. Your Honor, while Mr. Cross may have made financial contributions to the business, Mrs. Cross was the creative force, the public face, and the primary decision-maker. Mr. Cross was essentially a silent partner who— Objection, Eleanor said, rising from her chair with the grace of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. Your Honor, Mr. Pemberton is testifying rather than presenting evidence. Sustained, Judge Chin said, and the look she gave Pemberton could have frozen hell over. Mr. Pemberton, do you have any new evidence to present, or are we going to continue with creative storytelling? That's when Eleanor stood up and delivered what can only be described as a legal masterpiece. Your Honor, if I may address the court's question about context. She walked over to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. The plaintiff would like to present additional evidence that we believe provides the complete picture of Mr. Cross's role in the defendant's business success. Judge Chin gestured for her to proceed, and Eleanor opened that folder like she was revealing the crown jewels. This, Your Honor, is a complete audit of Miranda's boutique from its inception to the present day, conducted by a certified public accountant. She handed copies to the judge and to Pemberton, who looked like he was about to throw up. This audit shows that prior to Mr. Cross's involvement, the business was operating at a loss of approximately $30,000 per quarter. She let that number sink in for a moment before continuing. Within 6 months of Mr. Cross's investment and operational involvement, the business showed its first profit. Within 1 year, quarterly profits had increased to an average of $40,000. The current quarterly profit average is $65,000. I watched Miranda's face during this presentation, and it was like watching someone realize that their house had been built on quicksand. Because what Eleanor was laying out wasn't just my contribution to the business, it was proof that without me, there wouldn't be a business to fight over. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, this audit shows that Mr. Cross's marketing strategies directly resulted in a 340% increase in customer base. His inventory management system reduced overhead costs by 35%, and his supplier negotiations improved profit margins by an average of 22%. Pemberton tried to object, but Judge Chin waved him off like she was shooing away a particularly annoying fly. Your Honor, Eleanor said, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Cross wasn't just a contributor to this business. He was the architect of its success. Mrs. Cross provided the initial vision and continues to serve as the public face, but Mr. Cross transformed that vision into a profitable enterprise. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the financial breakdown. Based on Mr. Cross's initial investment, his ongoing contributions, and his role in the business's success, the plaintiff is seeking 50% of all business assets, 50% of all jointly acquired property, and recognition of his status as co-owner rather than employee. The silence in that courtroom was so complete you could have heard a mouse sneeze. Miranda was staring at the table in front of her like it might contain answers to questions she didn't even know how to ask. Pemberton was frantically scribbling notes that probably said things like, "We're screwed," and "update resume." Judge Chin spent what felt like an eternity reviewing the audit documents, occasionally looking up at Miranda with an expression that suggested she was seeing the case in an entirely new light. Mrs. Cross, she finally said, do you dispute the accuracy of this financial audit? Miranda looked up like someone had just slapped her awake. No, Your Honor. The numbers appear to be accurate. And do you dispute that Mr. Cross played a significant role in your business's financial success? Another long pause. Another moment of visible internal struggle. No, Your Honor. And do you dispute that you physically removed Mr. Cross from your vehicle and subsequently posted about it on social media? This time Miranda didn't even hesitate. No, Your Honor. Judge Chun leaned back in her chair and studied both parties like she was looking at two particularly disappointing children who'd forced her to sort out their mess. Very well. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony given, and the financial audit provided, this court finds that Mr. Cross has demonstrated substantial contribution to the marital assets in question. She paused to flip through her notes. The court hereby grants the dissolution of marriage and awards Mr. Cross 50% of all business assets, 50% of all jointly acquired property, and recognition as co-owner of Miranda's boutique. The gavel came down with the finality of a coffin lid closing. I felt like I should be celebrating, jumping up and down, maybe doing a victory dance right there in the courtroom. But honestly, all I felt was tired. Tired and relieved, and maybe a little sad that it had come to this. Miranda sat frozen in her chair, staring at nothing, while Pemberton gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone who wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. In the gallery behind me, Marcus was probably fighting to keep from cheering out loud. But the real victory wasn't the money or the property or even the recognition. The real victory was walking out of that courtroom as a free man, no longer bound to someone who'd thrown me away like garbage and then expected me to be grateful for the experience. As we packed up our documents, Eleanor leaned over and whispered, "How does it feel to be vindicated?" "Like justice," I said. "It feels like justice." Outside the courthouse, Miranda caught up with us as we were walking to Eleanor's car. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like someone had let all the air out of her. "Adrian," she called, and I turned around to face the woman who'd been my wife for 6 years and my adversary for the last 2 months. "What, Miranda?" I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. About the car, about believing Lila, about all of it. Too little, too late, but I appreciated the gesture." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back 6 years of marriage to someone who was willing to believe the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story." She nodded like she understood, though I doubted she really did. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think I'm finally starting to see what Lila really is. What she's been doing to both of us." "Good," I said. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before letting a 20-year-old run your life." And with that, I walked away from Miranda Cross for the last time. You know what they don't tell you about winning? Sometimes it feels exactly like losing, except with better paperwork and a bigger bank account. 3 months after Judge Chin's gavel had officially ended my marriage and started my new life, I was standing on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at a city that suddenly felt full of possibilities instead of problems. The apartment was a complete 180 from the house I'd shared with Miranda. No marble countertops or designer fixtures. No walk-in closets big enough to house a small family. Just clean lines, lots of windows, and the kind of minimalist aesthetic that screams, bachelor who's got his shit together. It was exactly what I needed, a fresh start that didn't come with 6 years of emotional baggage built into the walls. Marcus had helped me move in, naturally. The guy had become my unofficial life coach, marriage counselor, and reality check all rolled into one. He'd taken one look at my new place and nodded approvingly. "This," he'd said, cracking open a beer and settling into my new leather couch, "this is what winning looks like." He wasn't wrong. The settlement had been even better than Eleanor had predicted. 50% of the business assets, 50% of the house proceeds when Miranda was forced to sell it, and a nice chunk of the investment portfolio we'd built together. Turns out, when you actually contribute to a marriage instead of just taking up space, the courts tend to notice. But the real satisfaction came from the follow-up reports I kept getting about Miranda and Lila's ongoing implosion. Because apparently, when you remove the common enemy that's been holding your toxic family dynamic together, things get very ugly very quickly. Sarah from the book club had become my unofficial intelligence source, though I suspected she was getting as much entertainment out of the gossip as I was. She'd stopped by the previous week with updates that were better than any reality TV show. "So get this," she'd said, settling into my kitchen with coffee and the latest neighborhood drama. "Miranda had to put the house on the market last month. This wasn't news to me. I'd been tracking the sale as part of the settlement agreement. But Sarah had details that went beyond the legal paperwork. Apparently, Lila showed up the day before the real estate photos were taken and threw an absolute fit. Started screaming about how this was her childhood home and Miranda had no right to sell it just to pay Adrian his blood money. Blood money. I had to admire Lila's commitment to making me the villain in her story, even when faced with overwhelming evidence that she destroyed her mother's life for no good reason. And then what happened? Miranda finally grew a spine and told her that if she wanted to keep the house, she was welcome to come up with $500,000 to buy out your share. Sarah laughed like this was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. Lila said Miranda should take out another mortgage, and Miranda told her that her credit was already maxed out from trying to keep the business afloat during the divorce proceedings. That was interesting news. I'd wondered how Miranda was handling the financial pressure of losing half her assets while trying to maintain her lifestyle. Apparently, not well. But here's the really good part, Sarah continued. Lila demanded that Miranda give her money to put down on her own apartment, since she was being forced out of her family home. When Miranda said she couldn't afford it, Lila accused her of choosing you over her own daughter. And Miranda told her that she'd already chosen you over her daughter 6 years ago when she married you. And the only reason that choice had been a mistake was because Lila had spent 6 years systematically sabotaging it. I had to give Miranda credit for finally connecting the dots, even if it was about 3 months too late to save our marriage. The business reports were even better. According to Eleanor's contacts in the financial community, Miranda's boutique was struggling without my operational expertise. Inventory was piling up, customer complaints were increasing, and the marketing budget was being wasted on flashy campaigns that looked good but didn't actually drive sales. She's learning the hard way that running a business involves more than just being the pretty face in the advertising. Eleanor had told me during our final meeting. Your ex-wife is discovering that all those systems you put in place weren't just suggestions. They were the foundation that kept everything running smoothly. The irony was delicious. Miranda had spent years taking credit for the business's success while minimizing my contributions. Now she was finding out exactly how much she'd been taking for granted. But the news that really made my day came from Marcus, who'd run into Lila at a coffee shop downtown. She'd apparently been working as a barista for the past month, which was probably the first real job she'd ever had in her life. She looked like hell, Marcus had reported with obvious satisfaction. Hair in a messy bun, coffee stains on her uniform, and the kind of dead-eyed expression you get from dealing with entitled customers all day. Did she see you? Oh yeah, made eye contact and everything. I ordered a large coffee, extra hot, and told her to have a wonderful day. Marcus grinned like a man who'd just won the lottery. She looked like she wanted to spit in my cup, but apparently even she's not stupid enough to mess with customers when she needs the job. The mental image of Princess Lila taking orders from random strangers and cleaning up spilled milk was almost too perfect to believe. Justice had a sense of humor after all. But the real moment of closure came 2 weeks later, when I was leaving my new office. Yeah, I'd started my own consulting business, because apparently getting screwed over by your wife is excellent motivation for professional independence. I was walking to my car when I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I turned around, and there was Lila, looking nothing like the confident young woman who destroyed my marriage for months earlier. She was thinner, tired-looking, and dressed in clothes that actually looked like they came from a normal store instead of her mother's boutique. Adrian, she said, and her voice had none of its usual edge. Can we talk? I can't imagine what we'd have to talk about, I said, because honestly, I couldn't. The girl had made it clear that she considered me the enemy from day one. What could she possibly want to discuss now? I wanted to apologize. For what I said about you. For what I did to you and Mom. This was unexpected. Lila admitting she was wrong was like witnessing a solar eclipse. Rare, memorable, and probably a sign that something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Okay, I said. I'm listening. I was jealous, she said, and the words came out like they physically hurt to say. Mom was so happy with you, and I felt like I was losing her. So I convinced myself that you were the problem, and I did everything I could to get rid of you, including lying about me stealing from her. Including that. Lila looked down at her hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. I told myself I was protecting her, but really I was just selfish. I wanted her all to myself. It was the first honest thing I'd ever heard come out of her mouth, and it was about 4 months too late to matter. Well, I said, you got what you wanted. You have her all to yourself now. No, I don't. Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. She won't even talk to me anymore. She blames me for ruining her marriage, for destroying her business, for everything that's gone wrong in her life. And there it was, the final piece of poetic justice. Lila had gotten exactly what she'd thought she wanted, only to discover that destroying other people's happiness doesn't actually make you happy. It just makes you the kind of person who destroys other people's happiness. I'm sorry that happened, I said, and I actually meant it. Not because I felt bad for Lila. She'd made her bed and now she was lying in it. But because the whole situation was just wasteful. 6 years of marriage, a successful business partnership, and a family dynamic that could have worked if everyone had just been honest about what they wanted. Do you think? Lila started, then stopped herself. Never mind. What? Do you think you could ever forgive me? For what I did? I thought about that for a long moment. Forgiveness is a tricky thing. It's not about pretending someone didn't hurt you, and it's not about letting them off the hook for the consequences of their actions. It's about choosing not to carry their poison around inside you anymore. I already have, I said. But that doesn't mean I trust you, and it doesn't mean I want you in my life. Some things break in ways that can't be fixed. Lila nodded like she understood, though I suspected she was hoping for a different answer. For what it's worth, she said, you were good for her. For Mom. She was happier with you than I'd ever seen her. I know, I said. That's what makes this whole thing so pointless. And with that, I walked away from Lila Cross for the last time. That night, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out at the city lights and thinking about second chances. Not the kind where you go back and try to fix what's broken, but the kind where you take what you've learned and build something better. I'd gotten my revenge, all right. Not by screaming or plotting or trying to hurt Miranda and Lila the way they'd hurt me. I'd gotten my revenge by refusing to let their toxicity define my future. I'd gotten my revenge by building a life that was better than anything I could have had with them. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.